Hi, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture, the podcast where sometimes I interview amazing people and professionals in the field of healing relationships with food, and sometimes I chat with my brother and fellow human who also hates diet culture, Nick. We talk about diet culture, a systemic and oppressive force in all of our lives that wastes our time at best and destroys livelihood at worst. We dissect the problems, share stories, and give suggestions on where we can all go from here. This podcast is for informational, educational, and inspirational purposes only, and never a substitution for individual medical or nutritional advice. Nick is with me today, and we're talking about an article that I read for some CECs about fitness watches and nutrition apps, and just how the mark can get really easily missed when trying to tie in some information about like preventing eating disorders, but also promoting weight loss at the same time. And some of my thoughts and Nick's thoughts as well, just about the usefulness of these tracking devices, as well as the science behind getting 10,000 steps in per day.
Hey Dan, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Good little subtle. I'm corporate work, so everything stops towards this side of the year. Things really slow down in November. So good, nice oasis of a pace at this point for me.
Good. I just had a chocolate milkshake, so I'm feeling pretty happy.
I love it. This is good energy then.
Okay, so over the weekend, I was working on some of my continuing education credits for my certified personal trainer credentials. I don't talk about this a whole lot because I'm not a personal trainer, but I'm certified for it, and I wasn't ready to let this certificate lapse. So I did a really cool course throughout the majority of this year. I was working on it about pre and postnatal like fitness and preparing for childbirth, which was interesting for me because of the journey I'm on. But I still needed some more credit. So I purchased this bundle of articles that you read and then have to take a quiz on so that you can get continuing education credits. And nothing was like particularly striking me as what I wanted, because honestly I want to read things about like what I'm interested in, like anti-diet culture stuff, but that's pretty hard to find in the fitness realm. But in this particular package that I landed on, this one article is entitled Fitness Watches and Nutrition Apps, Behavioral Benefits and Emerging Concerns. So I was like, okay, let's dig into this and see what's up. So I posted about this a little bit on my Instagram over the weekend because I was very frustrated and just like wanted to vent a little bit and to bring a little bit of awareness to some of like the really gross ways that our culture and the fat phobia like really like wrap themselves into something that is trying to be good and I think healing. So I'm gonna talk about this one particular part that first got me like, oh my goodness. Okay, so this is talking about tracking nutrition like in an app. I think they were alluding to being able to do it somewhat on your watch maybe, but I don't have any apps that I can do that with. So I'm not 100% sure, but this quote. So clients can immediately see their total calories for the day, which helps provide awareness about the value of different food and drink items beyond just an awareness of the overall amount of food they are consuming. So like referring to how you could just write it all down, but if you can track it, you can get the calories. Okay, so for example, clients may have written down their venti green tea frappuccino and had a vague understanding that it was not the healthiest choice, but they might not have realized that it contained close to a third of their entire daily recommended caloric intake. So I was like, oof, this sucks for a lot of reasons. And the first thing that gets me fired up is saying that it's not the healthiest choice because, again, I'm always gonna come back to the fact that you can't, like, label one food as being quote unquote "good" or bad. That's not how nutrition works, that's not how food works, but we really love to do that because then we can be quote unquote "good" if we're eating better food. But also, like, this hyper awareness about calories and being very concerned about them is not a health promoting behavior, and I think the idea behind this is that it will be health promoting because you get more education, and, like, that was a big push, I think, behind a lot of companies having to put their calories out because they were, like, trying to help people understand what they were taking in, and I think, like, my goal is not to hide nutrition information from people, but it just that sentence just feels so loaded for me because it's really going hard on this one thing that someone is doing, um, alluding to it being such a negative thing. And it's also not necessarily wrong for someone to get a third of their calories in a day from something, like, depending on what their day is looking like. Um, it's it can be really useful to have energy dense things, like, I would recommend people eat more often than 3 times a day, but I also wanna look up how many, um, calories is in this, and so, um, to see what they're saying someone's recommended caloric intake is in a day. So, we'll just call this the most possible calories we could get out of a green tea depending on the whip combo and the milk combo that you could do, and the highest number is 510 calories. So this article is saying that you should be eating no more than, um, 1,500 calories a day by saying that. And I have a feeling that this person, like, may have been doing that in an exaggerative way, but that's extremely problematic because, like, that's not good advice to be giving someone, and that, again, made me think, like, this is about weight loss because that's the kind of information someone would be giving someone who believed in pursuing a calorie deficit for purposeful weight loss. So, just very frustrating, and I like to talk about these things because I think that a lot of this is really commonly accepted in our society as being just, like, a normal thing to say, and just demonizing food and making these broad accusations that are just wildly inappropriate. Having 1,500 calories when you're, especially someone who's seeing a personal trainer and you're active, that is very dangerous, that is not enough food. Okay, so this article goes on, and we get to this part where it's looking like there may be some good things, coming out of this because it's talking about how, um, sometimes tracking certain health behaviors like your steps or your calories can go too far, and become unhealthy if someone has, like, an extreme or obsessive focus on counting calories and continually increasing exercise goals. So you get down here, it's talking about some eating disorder statistics and giving some decent information. But then we get to this part that says that although elevated dietary restraint is not necessarily a concern. So basically, what they were saying of, like, tracking of Frappuccino and saying this is a third of my calories and oof, shouldn't have done that. Um, Not necessarily concerned, and is typically a crucial component to producing maintained weight loss. So again, it's okay if you need to lose weight to be, restricting your intake. Extreme dietary restraint is associated with eating disorders. So, this article is giving us all this information about the risk of these things becoming destructive and potentially deadly for someone, again, as like part of that fuel to the fire for someone who's predisposed to developing an eating disorder. But even like disordered eating because of this stuff is very detrimental if it becomes that. And so basically, elevated dietary restraint, that's great. That's okay. You need that to lose weight. But extreme dietary restraint, that's associated with eating disorders. And I would really love to have that quantified of like, what is the difference to you, writer, of what is elevated dietary constraint and what is extreme dietary restraint? Because I think as an eating disorder dietitian that tracking your calories is extreme dietary restraint, period. Um, because you're doing it for a reason. And I am likely to say that it's probably because you're afraid of eating too much, quote unquote, because you're trying to lose weight or not gain weight, or you've already developed something kind of obsessive. But oftentimes it's being promoted by healthcare professionals. And a personal trainer, I definitely would say, like, is lumped into that if, especially because of all the quote unquote health that we talk about, which oftentimes is a little bit um, off base, I would say, from genuine health, but it's definitely health related. So, like, it gives tips of like referring out if you are concerned, which is lovely. Like, I love this so much, but we talk a lot on this podcast about how, like, intentions only go so far if they're not coming from a genuine place of like actually having done the work to try and dismantle fat phobia and really challenge our beliefs about people and what health really means from this like massive amount of research and evidence we have that it's not what we're being told and have been told forever. That like it's almost worse for me to write something like this and still have that blatant like discriminatory talk in here than it would have been to just not educate at all, because it's still really missing the mark um, of actually getting to the root. And I think if we dance around it like this, it's very confusing, super invalidating, and just like continually promoting toxic cultural problems that we have that are damaging to people's lives.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that for a while now, there's been this whole thing about there's been a big judgment. Um, I would say probably since the Super Size Me era. I think probably some of this came out of that, but big judgment on the money spent. Like a lot of people will constantly cite, like, oh, there was this much money spent on weight loss and this much weight loss. And they'll be like, there was too much money spent on weight loss and not enough weight loss. Like that's a common thing that people say is that the average person has spent 1,600 on a home weight loss remedy via exercise equipment, and here's how they should have spent that money. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
a I can try and look up some actual numbers there. I'm just citing the rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
And that is there. But so that's the thing. It's not like memeing people for like, yo, too much. It's like, oh, it seems corrective. It's like, oh, well, these fitness trackers just aren't doing the trick, you know, like I know that's not the intention of this article, but that's like what the rhetoric has been for a while. If someone's talking about a uh, air quotes weight loss initiative or product or service that isn't weight lossing, then here's what we need to do to better it. And I think that that other thing is, which is even worse, the big product of all of this, that's the worst thing, is that they say like, oh, weight loss is like, it's just not going to happen if you can't will it to happen, right? Like that's the
Right.
whole concept of um, blaming the products and the money spent. And obviously, I think
Mhm.
that is the most cancerous thing that can be given to uh, anyone. So,
Yeah, it's upsetting. Um, I've been angry, like, specifically with my fitness pal ever since I was in before while I was, like, in my disordered eating, like, before I developed a full-blown eating disorder. I remember learning about this and hearing how if you plug certain things in and say you wanna lose weight, it'll pop out like a 1,200 calorie. I don't know if it still does this, but I have heard this many, many times over the years of being talked to about people using MyFitnessPal, but it'll spit out a 1,200 calorie, like, recommendation, which is so unethical and inappropriate and dangerous, because that does not meet, energy needs, especially because you okay, so a lot of times when I was working in private practice and people were talking about these apps, they were trying to then burn off the calories, like, they wanted to limit their food to this, like, 1,200, and then they wanted to burn almost that much. Their idea was that they wanted a net 0 energy balance, and that was how they were going to have success, and these are people who, like, just your average person, like, the number of times I had to tell somebody that this is not gonna work, and this wasn't even me being worried about an eating disorder, but just, like, you're not understanding, like, your body can't function like this, and it was so common for that to happen, and, like, for these apps to be able to give advice like that out to people, it's so terrifying, and you're right, then if you don't get the results, it's like, "Oh, you didn't follow it, you must not have tracked correctly," like, people get all these things in their head about, like but you're never gonna have this perfect first of all, this podcast is not about trying to help people lose weight, but creating a net 0 energy balance for yourself is not going to be a sustainable method. That's very, very dangerous. It's not gonna be sustainable, and these apps, like, with getting into the numbers, I've seen people's minds just, like, get so wrapped up into it, and I never recommended it even when I was helping people lose weight, which I hate every time I have to say that, but, I didn't recommend this because I watched how, like, truly wild people got when this information was presented to them, and it didn't help anything. It just created obsession, and so they're talking about how this can, like, lead to an eating disorder, which it certainly can, but, like, it's not I don't think this is good for anybody, and a lot of people will argue with this, especially very, like people who really think you need to, like, look a certain way to be good enough, and the fitness industry, I'm not saying it's entirely that, but, like, loaded with people like that. I just saw some, um, like, TikTok was Jillian Michaels, like, shaking her head saying when they say that calorie counting doesn't work, and it's just like, this is a highly privileged individual who has access to literally everything and still thinks that, like, this is what you're supposed to do and wants to promote that to people, um, and that again is, like, that separate layer of I don't promote intentional weight loss, but, like, it's just so problematic.
um, yeah, I mean, touching on what you were just saying, and yes, again, I'm not promoting weight loss when I say that when I say method A, method B, method C doesn't work to
Right,
get to weight
exactly.
loss. I'm furthering the point that weight loss isn't a viable solution to anything, right? Like that's what I'm saying. It's don't
Yes.
pursue this. But so here's a quote from this article. In addition, there are reports that there may be little to no benefit of using fitness trackers compared with other weight loss methods. For example, one study examined participants who were randomly assigned to a weight loss program plus wrist worn fitness tracker, or a control group. So, three things. Results indicated that at 3 months, those who were in the weight loss only program, weight loss no fitness tracker, differed from the control condition, resulting in greater weight loss. But the weight loss plus activity tracker condition did not differ from the control. So the people that did weight loss plus were I'm just going to use the term Fitbit, uh, had the same amount of weight loss as a random control group that was not trying to pursue weight loss. So uh, this is even more of a meme because typically what we talk about is what did they say, 3 months? So typically when we analyze these statistics, we always talk about uh, we always use the term, is it within 2 years, 99% of weight lost is gained back? Is that the
So there's it's like 98% failure rate. I don't know the number of years off the top of my head.
Okay. So but that's we always typically we always talk about it's the statistic typically is you did a weight loss, then like
Yes.
you did a weight gain. But this one literally isn't even that. This one's just at 3 months. The control group was still identical to the group that tried to lose weight via the assistance of a wrist worn fitness tracker, which
Right.
is just like ironic. And I think this is ironic too, and Mimi to me also because like I do think uh, self monitoring watchers and things like that are good ultimately, but obviously it's like if you monitor, like you're monitoring heart rate and stuff like that, you're monitoring your health in the bare
Mhm.
minimum, correct?
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
think
just
that's
the
the
health
future.
statistic.
Yeah, that's like the future. More of that is what we need. But like this is funny because this is a detriment. And you could say obviously it's, we're branding these things. No offense to Fitbit, branding it the Fitbit. Like there was a reason why people bought the Fitbit. I don't think it was very purchased at first for people who had like uh an anormal heart beat. Like I think
Right.
it was like I want to see how many calories I walked
Yes.
away. So
Yeah.
that to me is the like meme of all of this, is that uh and again with the nutrition facts being on the back of your Aquafina water bottle, like I think it's good to have transparency,
100%.
but then the effect of this when we brand it like this, when we
Right.
it's not just transparency of information, it's like the weaponization of
Yes.
facts and statistics to glean an outcome or to try to get an outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. That always makes me think of, like, those memes about how people, like, pay all this money for, like, cold pressed fresh juice and down that, but demonize sugar, and it's like, how many grams of sugar do you think is in your cold pressed juice? Like, it's just these things that make money, so that's one outcome, but also, like, our fear of being a weight that we're not, quote, unquote, "supposed to be," like, really drives all this, and I think that many people would probably read this article and think it was really good because it is highlighting a lot of stuff that isn't often talked about, and I think just a few years ago, I probably would have seen this and be like, "Wow, like, good job for pointing out these issues." It's just that, like, it's not about being nitpicky, but genuinely, like, if we're not gonna fully do the work and do the job, we're not actually helping anybody. Because basically we're saying, like, unless you have an eating disorder, it's, like, good and fine and normal to do this, and other thing, like, some of the symptoms that people like, we talked about this with the eating disorder myths episode, is that a lot of people, especially in larger bodies, get missed for having eating disorders because of the stigma we have around it, and so I think this still really misses the mark, um, by a long shot, and it's just very disappointing, to have that in the same sentence of elevated dietary restraint is not a concern, but extreme dietary restraint is associated with eating disorders, like, oof.
6.4 dietary restraints per day is what constitutes extreme. Sorry, I'm joking. It's just I like to point out the like, I don't know, flimsiness of some of these statements.
Yeah, I agree. So, that's pretty much, like, what I wanted to tear apart about this article and just, like, highlight, but something that, I was reminded of while I was reading this is how we have this, like, self-set standard to try and get, like, 10,000 steps a day. On average, that's a number I don't know if that comes to your mind, but that's, like, I think a
Yes.
pretty common number of steps people would try to be tracking and
Yeah.
compare themselves to, and Oh, years ago, I came across something that was like, there's no research behind this, it's just an arbitrary number that was made up, and I said that out loud in a group, and I was told that I was wrong and that there is research to back this being health promoting, and I never, like, followed through of, like, determining where this research lied, so I was like, "Oh, perfect for this episode, like, let's dig into this a little bit," and the 10,000 steps came from, a Japanese company that made a device, I'm not gonna pronounce this correctly, but it translates to 10,000 steps meter. So, the name of this device was some kind of marketing tool, that found its way into our, like, health conscious culture and became something like, I guess this device monitored like, was the first Fitbit is kind of what I'm understanding. Um, so this is from the Washington Post. So in 10,000 steps is the goal, but it grew out of the marketing campaign for a pedometer. Okay, yes, invented in 1965 by a Japanese professor of health science who believed walking 10,000 steps daily would help the Japanese people avoid obesity. And the name of the pedometer was Manpo Kai, which again, I do not know if I'm pronouncing correctly or how to fact check that, but 10,000 step meter. Um, and then there were like ads for this, I guess, that said, let's walk 10,000 steps a day. So that's where it came from. It was literally just like somebody who said, let's do this to prevent obesity, which, um, again, when I use that term, I'm putting quotes around it, but in this article, it's just straight up being used because most people believe that that is a detriment to health. And so, yeah, isn't that just like wild? Because there's evidence like in just looking at these few articles that talk about how any steps that you take can be health promoting. Like if you are inactive and you start to become active, that's going to be beneficial because we know that movement is important. This also irritates me a little bit just because, like, we talk about, um, just how exclusive so much of the healthism is, and just thinking about, like, ableism, for example, of, like, talking about how having to get 10,000 steps is an important indicator for health, and that's really not, like, comprehensive for all people to be able to do that, and so it's, again, like, this, like, elitist thing that just came from something that someone said was a good idea, and it isn't actually, like, necessary for well-being, but yes, being active is when you have a stable relationship with activity, I want to say, because if you are actively abusing exercise as part of your eating disorder, have a really inappropriate relationship with utilizing it, this wouldn't be health promoting actually to be trying to increase your steps. I have to have these conversations a lot at my job with people needing to really give their bodies that time to rest. But I just thought that the history behind this was very fascinating because it seems like something very different in today.
Yeah, also, like, when I was in college, I had a Fitbit for 6 months until it fell off. It had shoddy design. I will criticize them for that still. Anyways, that's besides the point. Um, my 10,000 steps were different to there was, someone else on my hall. There's a female in my hall that also had a Fitbit, and it wasn't a 2-to-1 ratio, but it was like 1.8 to 1. My steps to hers,
Hmm.
how far my steps took me versus how far her steps took her.
Hmm.
So there you go. There's another, like, it be arbitrary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um,
It's just
I
funny too because it sounds better. The average is 10,000 steps is 5 miles, and 5 miles just, I don't know, that 5 miles seems so much more arbitrary than 10,000 steps. 10,000 steps, you're just like, oh, what a word.
Yep.
That's four zeros. Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
So
Um, so history is always very interesting because I feel like anytime we dig into that, it's like, it's just never what you expected it to be based on what we're being told constantly, especially from companies who, make money off of it, and I feel like I should, like, full disclosure that I wear an Apple Watch, mostly because in my job, I like being able to have the time on my wrist and to be able to, like, see text messages if something, like, important's happening without being very disruptive, and I just find it super convenient, but I do like, it does track my steps, I don't have that turned off, and I have found that interesting just to look at, but something, like, that I make sure and intentionally, like, not wear my watch some days on the weekend because I think that someone who's been in recovery and promotes recovery, like, just things that could, like, be a slippery slope of, like, obsession, the things I know I used to care a lot about, I that's, like, self-care for me to sustain recovery is, like, to make sure that I'm not putting myself in a situation of, like, having constant access to how much I walk every day because I know that, like, there is a potential for that to get in my head under the right circumstances, and so I think, like, even just the average person can get really wrapped up in that, and even just, like, years and years and years out in a recovery journey, like, certain things like this information, like, it's not wrong to have access to it, but just making sure that you're paying attention to where your head is at and that you're not letting it become something that it doesn't need to be because it's like, there's a lot of jokes just like when you go to the gym and don't have your headphones. I feel like I've seen just as many jokes about how if you go to the gym and don't have your Apple Watch or your fitness your Fitbit or whatever, people wear with you, then your workout didn't count because you didn't get to see how many calories you burned, and I just wanna reflect that, like, I get that's supposed to be a joke, but that's really not funny because that is so against, like, it that literally doesn't matter. We don't need that information, but it like, to the whole point of this entire episode, like, we're being told that we need that, and, like, if you don't sweat, like, the workout didn't count, and just all these pressures that get added that, like, equate to us being pieces of shit if we don't follow them, basically, like, it's really I'm laughing because I, like, don't know what else to do sometimes when I talk about this stuff because it's atrocious, um, and it's so easy to fall, like, victim to it, because that's literally what it's there for. So, yeah, if it's positive, um, great, but I feel like a lot of the times the information is not used in a good way, and for nutrition tracking. I only ever encourage that for someone who's trying to see if they're eating enough, like, under the care of, like, a dietitian to, like, make sure that they're doing if you're trying to eat more energy dense, like, in a recovery work or even just, like, someone who doesn't feel they have an eating disorder, but who has been really under eating and trying to, like, reestablish healthy eating patterns, and to do some healing, like, to see if you're actually getting enough nutrition, and I did that even in, like, unfortunately, like, as a, outpatient provider, like, seeing if people were eating enough who were trying to lose weight because, again, like, that wasn't helpful and, um, not something that I would recommend anymore, but just kind of, like, part of my brain was, like, onto something there, but I was still definitely latched on to the, like, "Oh, if this person's coming to me for weight loss advice, like, I'm gonna help them," like, still being very, like, on the fence about things there, but I think that would be the only reason that I would encourage this being used is to see if you're eating enough food to meet your body's energy needs, but for the most part, that's not what many providers or these apps are talking about. They're, like, trying to encourage you to eat, as this article said, 1,500 calories a day, which is really atrocious.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I feel like there are so many good uses for it. Like personally, like something like, oh, I'm flying this week. I'm not flying this week, but if I were flying, I've realized recently that like airports are a very hard place to get the meal you need in, uh, stuff like that. Like I had a flight to LA, and I had 20 minutes to decide between like a $20 bag of 3 pistachios or like Cava, and then the flight was 5 hours, 20 minutes, and there's, like, 1 snack on the flight, I
Right.
think. So it's like, "Oh, what do I do?" But a good instance of tracking for me is would have been like, "Oh, here's what you like, you did you end up sustaining yourself or did you not?" I don't know, like, I feel like there are some helpful instances
Yeah.
of tracking and monitoring nutrition, but it's just such a slippery slope, especially when the information is just not on like logs or whatever. Like it's always like you're always in Fitbit, you're always in Apple Health, you're always in
Mhm.
blah 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 when you're checking all this information, you're always in someone else's realm where they have like they're marketing a brand and they're
Mhm.
pushing a product and the product is weight loss. So
Yeah. Um, there's also, like, a lot of inaccuracies in this kind of tracking and, like, our bodies aren't machines, so going back to what I was saying earlier about how people are trying to, like, get this, like, net 0 energy balance, you're never gonna get a perfect like, each day and, like, different meals and different people's bodies are gonna absorb different amounts of energy, and, like, there's so many variables that make this, like, not perfect that I find it kind of funny because I think the point of all this is to track it to perfection, like that article was saying, "Oh, you can write down what you're eating, but if you don't know how many calories are in it, you don't know that you're ruining your health by consuming this thing that's a third of your calories for the day." And it's like, but who cares because it's not even information that's actually gonna be that useful, but again, like, I'm totally for transparency. I think it's important to have awareness if you are in a position to use that in a useful way, but a lot of times, like Nick, you were saying, we weaponize it, and if you don't have access to food, that is number 1 priority, and so, like, then again, this makes this conversation just, like, irrelevant to being a benefit to someone because we need that baseline accessibility, and so, like, a lot of this stuff is also coming from a place of a lot of privilege, and, like, Apple Watches are not inexpensive, and Fitbits can be a little bit, like, more accessible, I think now especially, but this stuff is very, like it's not, none of this is necessary to be well, is, I guess, the point that I'm trying to make here.
And thank goodness.
Yeah, seriously. So it's like, don't let marketing influence you. Think about it. Think about
Easy.
what it is that you are, if you have any inclination that any of this stuff could be negatively affecting you, like really thinking about what it is you're trying to gain at the root of it, and like some of the feelings that might be coming up around it, because I certainly think we all deserve to pursue health, if that is our choice, but like how do some of these things actually play into it, and then just being aware of the nature of like how toxic diet culture can be, in everything, and making informed decisions for yourself based on all of those things.
Yeah, another one of the things, another interesting. Well, this is I'm just reading this. This talks about sharing activity and setting up challenges and competitions with each other, and not just like challenges and competitions are really cool when it's in like a video game, but like I don't know, challenges and competition when it is for weight loss, double whammy, like absolutely inequitable and toxic
Yes.
practice. Look, I do think that it's good. Like, I enjoy playing soccer and basketball, and I have the privilege to do so. And that is a competition, yes, but it's not. It's like not focused on losing weight.
It's
Just
not
competing.
your job, looking at your BMI and then telling you if you lose X number of weight, you can get these benefits to your health insurance plan.
Yeah, man. I just don't know about that, and that's like, but it's really taking over right now. Um, like in Old Town Alexandria, which is where I reside currently, there I haven't found a gym yet that is just a place where one can go at any given time and do whatever gym activity and then leave. They are all group based or personal
Oh,
trainer. You have to get a personal trainer to step foot in most of these.
no Planet Fitness.
Not in the city of Old Town. Like, there's some near, but that's what I was. It's just an interesting thing to me, and I again encourage people. You know, there's so many different lines of all this stuff, but just make sure that you like getting yelled at to do something. Like I don't know, it's just like be cautious
Yeah,
because there's like several different ways that can go, and yeah.
no, I agree. I always want to promote joyful movement, and I think maybe some people do find those things to be joyful, but, like, when you're hooked up to a heart rate monitor to see how many, like, like, uh,
I mean, I definitely want to see. Like, I want to see in 5 years what is Orange Theory's thing? Like what are the results from Orange Theory? You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
are these people okay? Like not I'm not hating on you if you go to Orange Theory and whatnot. I'm just
No,
like
it's just yeah, it's there's I don't have the words to say what I'm trying to say right now, but I totally agree with you of just, like, it honestly, it's like holding curiosity around it, and, like, are we being not, I don't wanna say tricked, but it almost feels like that's what I'm feeling, is tricked into doing these things, by really good marketing and promise of happiness from being as thin and fit as possible.
yeah, that's all I'm saying. And then the like a lot of them like taking gym and fitness and weight loss out of the names of these companies like it's a progressive way of losing weight and stuff like
Mhm.
that. You know what I'm saying? Like we're just watching the evolution of this thing that is toxic is what I'm saying, and I'm
Yes.
trying to see how. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
anyways.
Okay. Well, I think that is all that I had on today's topic. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think I'm good.
All right, cool. Well, thank you guys for listening and can't wait to talk to you next week.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with diet culture on my Instagram page at dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support and can't wait to talk to you next week.